Hey guys, this is Jim, WT1W, and you're watching FEP Labs Radio. Thanks for stopping by. So today I want to take a look at the WPSD project. This is put out by W0CHP chip and the website, and we're going to look at all that in a minute. This guy originally created a replacement dashboard for the Pi-Star software. This is not Pi-Star. This is WPSD, and it's a derivative of the original Pi-Star software, but it ain't Pi-Star anymore. So, as I said, originally it was a dashboard replacement for Pi-Star, and then it has morphed into its own standalone project, and it's all free open source software. It adds a lot of nice upgrades to your hotspot functionality. It has a cleaner and more modern look, and a lot of other things, and we'll kind of go through that. I don't want this video to be an hour long, so I'm going to move kind of fast, but this is basically to get you started and load WPSD up and what you have to do to get it running, and a few tips about that. And I will put links to all of this in the description below. So the website here is w0chp.radio/WPSD, and this is the main web page for WPSD. And it talks about installing it. Chip has a great set of instructions on here. You can follow these and you'll be good to go. Here's the basic instructions. A few things you need to know. If you're using a first generation Pi Zero, you probably don't want to do this. He has some notes on that. And so he goes through which images to download for any vendor specific hotspots, as well as for Raspberry Pi, the Orange Pi Zero. And what WPSD is it's a complete replacement for Pi-Star. This supports your hotspot, and it supports all the digital modes, the big three, D-Star, DMR, and Fusion, as well as NXDN, P25, and POCSAG paging. So, which is all what Pi-Star supports. I believe this also supports M17 out of the box. So if you're fooling with M17, this has M17 support built into it as well. Chip has a fairly extensive web page here where he talks about updating it, installing it, the differences and the features and so on and so forth. The functionality, here's a list of it. I'm not going to read through all this. This has a whole bunch of things where it can manage Brandmeister. It has an instant mode manager where you can turn a mode on or off. Again, I mentioned POCSAG. It supports next-gen screens built in, so you don't have to mess around with next-gen scripts for your screen, which if you've ever done that, that is a pain in the butt. Anyway, so a whole bunch of features, but I think it just has a lot of really cool upgrade features. And as I said, the biggest thing is the interface is, in my opinion, a whole lot cleaner than the original Pi-Star. He has a lot of screenshots, notes about different supports, some issues with compatibility. The one I mentioned was the original Raspberry Pi Zero W, not the 02W. The 02W works fine. What you want to do is download the appropriate image. So I'm going to start that going right now, and we're going to download that. And while that is downloading, one thing I want to mention, and this is something that a lot of people miss, and it's a little hidden on here as well. When you boot up either Pi-Star or WPSD, it's going to come up in what's called AP mode, access point mode. And it will say something like, on the Pi-Star, I don't remember what WPSD shows, but Pi-Star shows Pi-Star setup. And so you have to connect to that with your computer or phone, for example, and set up your Wi-Fi. So the way around that is to create a config file prior to booting your SD card up. And that file is called wpa_supplicant.conf. There are a number of generators for that file on the internet. There's also one here on Chip's site. So I would highly recommend that you do that. And what you do is you put in the name of your Wi-Fi and your Wi-Fi password. It saves that file. It downloads it for you. And then you copy it to the root file, the root directory of the SD card, which will show up as boot on your computer. And then you'll see a list of files and folders in there. You copy this WPA file in there, and then when your WPSD hotspot boots up, it will come up on your Wi-Fi, and you don't have to go through that whole find Wi-Fi process, which is and copy it, and Bob's your uncle. So anyway, so now we have downloaded the WPSD software. It should be finished, it looks like. And so then we want to flash the image. And this is the second step. So this is where we're going to get our software image that's on our hard drive we just downloaded, and we're going to burn it or flash it to an SD card. And there are a number of programs you can use to do this. I use Balena Etcher. Again, I'll leave a link for Balena Etcher in the description below. So this is Balena Etcher. This is the actual program window right here that we have going. And it's going to ask us to select our image. So we are going to pop up our downloads. That's what we downloaded today. You do not need to uncompress the file. Tell it open. It validates that there's a file in there that is an image file. And now it's asking us to select our target. So this is where we're going to tell it what our SD card is that we want to image. We're now going to click select target, and it will show us any media that it thinks is removable media. Pay attention to what you're doing here. I know that I put in a 64 gig SD card. You do not need a 64 gig when 32 is gracious plenty, and you'll be fine. This is just the first SD card I had that was not being used for anything. And so we're going to click that and select it. This will format the SD card, and we're going to click flash. And Windows is going to pop up the, are you sure you want to do this? Because it's going to write to the drive, and this is going to do its thing. Okay, our flash finished, as you can see here, and we could flash another one, but we're good. So we've got this flashed, and if you look at your drive now, you will see you have a drive called boot in your list of drives on your computer. And this is where we want to put that wireless configuration file, that WPA supplicant file. So we're going to scooch him out of the way. And if you go over back to Chip's website, it will show us on here where we can set up our Wi-Fi. So we go to the config file generator and we put in our Wi-Fi info. And this is for mine. We select our country. And this is important because it's how your Wi-Fi is going to work in your country. So I'm in the United States, so I'm going to go almost all the way to the bottom here. And United States, and generate a config file. He's created the file right here, and we can either download it or copy and paste it in. Either way, we're going to download it. So now that we've downloaded the file, we're going to go pull up Windows Explorer, and there's our WPA supplicant file that we created today. So there's our file, and we need to copy that file now to that boot drive that we created over here. So I'm just going to drag that, copy it down to boot. I'm going to jump to boot, and then you will see down here we have a WPA supplicant.conf file. So what that's going to do for us now is when we boot up, this is going to jump onto my Wi-Fi network, so I don't have to go hunt down the IP address or anything else. This will come up with the default name of pystar.local, and we can either connect to that or we can go to the IP address, whichever one's easier for you. And Chip talks about all this in here. The default login name is Pystar, and the password is Raspberry. Again, that's the default. You can change that later. If you don't do the WPA supplicant process, you're going to have to go through the Pystar setup Wi-Fi network, like I mentioned, which takes longer. It's about 5 or 10 minutes. It's a pain in the butt. This is a whole lot easier process, in my opinion. So there's your default login information. So we've talked about downloading it. We flashed it. So now we have a burned SD card, and we are ready to boot up our Raspberry Pi with this. Okay, so we've got our SD card is in the Raspberry Pi. I'm using a Pi 02W. I upgraded the original Pi 0 to a 2W in this little case. And it's waiting for us to log in and do our configuration. So we're going to go to pi-star.local, and that will take us to the initial config page. Now, I've been in this once already. You get a different screen that says, hey, I'm going to take you to the config in 15 seconds. You need to set all this up. So here we are. So this is the main dashboard of an unset up WPSD instance. Right here. We've got some new things. We have profiles. We can get system info, which gives us the hardware information on our computer, temperature, memory utilization, network traffic, so on and so forth. And we want admin. So we're going to go to admin. Remember, the default login is pi-star and the password is raspberry. So now we're all logged in where we can set everything up. And as you can see over here on the left side, we don't have any modes enabled at all. But let's go into configuration. And you see we have other things here we can do, and we'll come back to some of that. So let's go to config, since we have nothing set up at this point. So what you want to do here, and these settings, a lot of these are just however you want to set it up, is a host name. You can name it, leave it named pi-star if you want. So we're going to call this one test pi. And you can see that the software knows that we've made changes. So before we can go on too far, we need to apply these changes as we go. Put in your call sign. Put in your DMR ID. That's new. I didn't know it did that. It picked that up from my call sign. So kind of cool. I did not know it did that. If you don't have an NXDN ID, that doesn't matter. And if you're not doing DMR, then that's fine too. I do, and it pulled those, so great. Are we going to operate this as a simplex or duplex node? If you have two antennas on your hotspot, and some do, you can operate it like a little baby repeater. We don't have that on this. This is a single unit right here. So we're just going to use simplex, and we're going to set a frequency, and we're going to give this 446.250. And then you need to pick your radio modem type. Now, you need to kind of know what you've got, and this should be in the information you got when you bought your hotspot, whether you bought it off of Amazon or whether you built your own. There are a number of radio types here, as you can see. So what we want to do is we want to find the correct one for us. So I believe this is an DVM HS hat. I'm 99.9% sure, and it's using the GPIO pins. Baud rate is fine. I'm in the Chicago time zone. I like English. And we'll leave enabled for automatic updates. And now we need to apply that. So we're going to click that, and it's going to reset our pi. And then we're getting a warning here that we could save our configuration and profile. And if you're monkeying with multiple settings, you want to create profiles. So we've got test pi. We've got our frequency set. So on and so forth. That's all done. Now we need to go down to the next setting. So here is our location, and I'm at 32.1 and minus 86.3, and I am in Pentlala, EM62TE. And then my country is USA, and we'll set this to auto, and it will change this URL to my QRZ page. I'm not going to fool with APRS. You can have this send out APRS and do all the APRS stuff. That's way beyond what we want to fool with in this video. Also, you can enable GPS if you have a GPS attached to your Raspberry Pi. I don't intend to move my house anytime soon, so I'm going to leave it. And then we're going to apply those changes. Okay, we've got our updates done for that setting, our node location. And now we're up to setting the modem, or the modes rather. And we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Here's the display if you have a display on this one. This has a display, and I think it's an OLED on mine. And that is the correct port. And here's the layout type. You can play with those. I don't ever look at this tiny screen anyway, so I don't really care what's on it. All right, so we've updated that piece. And this is, if you're using this as a multi-user hotspot, for most people, you're not going to do this, so leave this alone. It's going to be set to private. Don't fool with it. Firewall configuration. If you know what these are, feel free to fool with them. We're not going to get into that. And one thing I definitely want to say about WPSD is it's much faster than the older Pi-Star. Here is our Wi-Fi information, which, because we created that config file initially, we don't have to fool with Wi-Fi. This is for the Auto AP SSID. So what this is going to do is, if the Raspberry Pi cannot find Wi-Fi when you boot this, it will go into access point mode, AP mode, and come up where you could connect to it with your phone or something and tell it to get on the correct Wi-Fi at your house. The actual Pi becomes the hotspot, your Wi-Fi rather. So unless you carry your Raspberry Pi around and use it in multiple places with different Wi-Fi names, you can leave this as is. There's no need to change it. Just leave it at the default password because it's never going to turn on unless it can't find your home Wi-Fi. The remote access password, this is our login password. This is Raspberry. So this is the default. I'm going to change mine. And we're going to set that, and it's going to apply those changes, and it'll probably make me re-log in with my new password. It did. So that is now, my password is changed on this one. So this page is good, short of wanting to set up whatever modes we want to look at. I don't want to get into the details of all the modes. This is the basic setup right here. I'm going to turn on a mode and we'll play with that for the moment. Let's do D-Star. And I want to talk about these two things before we change them. So RF hang time and net hang time. This becomes a thing if you have multiple modes enabled and you're trying to monitor multiple talk groups, especially as they get busy. RF hang time is how long the software will stay on D-Star after I unkey a D-Star connection. That's after I unkey it. Net hang time is how long it will stay in the D-Star mode after somebody else unkeys on D-Star when I'm in D-Star mode. So when I'm on the D-Star net, as it is, it will hang for 20 seconds before it moves on to any of the other modes. This is only a thing at all if you have multiple modes turned on one WPSD Pi installation. Other than that, you can ignore that. If you're doing just D-Star on your hotspot, you don't even need to fool with it. Again, that's what it's for. It only really comes into play when you're using multiple modes on one hotspot. And that was the same for Raspberry Pi. A lot of these settings are exactly the same. The other thing I want to point out is you also have the ability to cross mode on this. The cross mode functionality is pretty cool. If you only have a Fusion radio and you want to get onto some cool DMR talk group, you can go from YSF to DMR, YSF to NXDN, and YSF to P25. And that is one of the reasons these are in here, is because P25, YSF, DMR, and NXDN are all really, really close in the way they work. So doing the cross mode is an easy thing. You'll notice there's no cross moding to D-Star. So those four modes are first cousins to each other. So that's why it's there. It's an easy thing to use and it works quite well. In our case, we're not going to fool with it because we're going to set this to D-Star. So I'm going to tell it apply changes, and it still wants me to save my configuration profile. So let's go do that real quick. Test profile for video, and we'll save it. So now this page will show you what your current profile is, and then a list of profiles you have. If I have one hotspot and I want to flip between NXDN and P25, whatever, if I want to flip between multiple modes, I can make a profile for D-Star that has the D-Star config on it. I can make a profile for NXDN that has that configuration on it. And it's a matter of coming in here and loading the specific profile. So that's what profiles are. Very cool. Let's go back to our configuration. And we're done with everything on this page. Most of this is pretty obvious what it is. There's nothing super tricky on here. I did get the right screen. I don't know if that'll even show up on the camera. Yeah, it does. So I did pick the right screen type, and I should have the right modem, and we'll find that out in a minute when we do the D-Star setup. So now we've gone through that page. Let's actually fiddle with D-Star. And when we jump over to admin, this is the basic admin page, and here are the things that are turned on, and we have the D-Star manager. And you can see here that we are active on D-Star. The D-Star network is up. There is our RPT1 and RPT2, and we're not linked to any reflectors right now. So we go into the D-Star manager, for example, and we can pick a reflector. And you can do this multiple ways. You can scroll through the long list, or you can start typing REF 030, and there it is. Select it. Charlie, link, request change. And you can see down here that we're now connected to reflector 30 Charlie. So that's D-star. Let's go back and change our mode real quick. And we want to go to config. And we want to come down here. And we're going to turn off D-star. We're going to turn on YSF. Apply changes. So now we are in YSF mode. And again, we need to go to the admin page to do our specific YSF setup. So we'll go to YSF. We'll go to YSF Manager now. And this is the reflector it wants to link to. I don't want to go to that one. I want to go to Toads. So again, you can type numbers, you can type words, or you can scroll through the list. I'm going to tell it link. I'm going to request change. It's going to do its thing. And we're now linked to Toads. That's all the YSF setup. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. All right. Let's jump back to config one more time. I'm going to go through the big three modes here. We're going to skip NXDN and P25, which is like 20 people in the whole United States that use them. I don't have anything that'll run M17 at the moment. So we're going to change to DMR. DMR gives us a bunch of different options. We're going to apply that real quick. Okay, so we changed our mode to DMR and we applied that change. And when that change applies, it's a little different for DMR because now we get this screen here on our main config page. All right, if you go to admin, you're not going to see anything yet at this point for DMR. And we have the configuration for the different DMR networks. You can use a combination of any of all of these. I don't want to get into setting all that up. For one, I haven't played with all those. I use Brandmeister. That's about all I've messed with. So this is what I'm going to show you real quick. Brandmeister requires hotspot security now. In the old days, it was 1Password, PASSW0RD, but now you have to create an account on brandmeister.network. I'll put a link to that below. And you have to set a hotspot security password for your hotspot. So if I wanted to connect to Brandmeister 3102 as my main one, I'd put in my BM password. This is not my password. And of course, my Brandmeister network ESSID. And this is all a little Brandmeister specific. So this is the number of hotspots. If I have 4 or 5 or 6 hotspots that are on Brandmeister, like one at work, one in my car, whatever, this is just a number that is like a little serial number on top of my DMR ID. So if this is my first one, I could pick 01. You don't have to pick 01. You can pick any of these numbers you want. Doesn't matter as long as there's no duplicates. And then with my password, and that would show up in my account on the Brandmeister network. And I can, from Brandmeister's side, show, I create static and dynamic linking to various talk groups as required. And I'm going to tell it I want to enable Brandmeister network, and I'm going to apply changes. Now, before I do that, I'm going to show you these other ones. This is where you do the setup for these other DMR networks. System X, Free DMR, HB Link, yada, 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 TGIF network, XLX network, general DMR settings. One note about these. So DMR uses a combination of color codes and time slots. By default, the WPSD software is going to use time slot 2. That's fine. And then this is your DMR color code. Think of time slot and color code as the equivalent of a PL tone on a regular repeater. So there's no need for you to change this. You only have one hotspot. Use color code 1 and let it be on time slot 2. You can change all that stuff if you want, but there's no reason to do that. For your home use, there's just almost no reason you're going to need to change either one of those. So leave it on time slot 2. To get us started, we're going to apply the changes. It restarts our service, and now we are up on DMR Brandmeister. That's our active mode. and we can scroll down here. We are enabled on Brandmeister, and we're using this as the Brandmeister master. There are a number of Brandmeister masters, so pick whichever one is appropriate to you. In the United States, there's 3 or 4 of them. I'm using 3102. So now if we go to our admin page and we go to our DMR network manager, now we will see the DMR network that we have enabled. So if you enable Brandmeister and TGIF and XLX, you would see a list of all the Brandmeister networks you may have enabled. I have never tried to connect to multiples at one time. I just don't, because I don't. And if we go to our dashboard, you'll see we're connected on time slot 2, color code 1. There's my DMR ID, and we're on the Brandmeister DMR 3102 master. We can also display talk group names, and it will update and show us talk group names. It does this for all the modes, basically. We can turn on caller details, and we can hide kerchunks. So if you turn on hide kerchunks, you won't see those annoying quick little key ups. If somebody keys up for less than a second, it's not going to pop up with call sign and they keyed up. And you can have that on or off. It doesn't affect anything other than the way the screen looks. I mentioned the live caller screen earlier. This is what the live caller screen looks like here. And as I'm not connected to a talk group at the moment, there's nothing on it, but if I was, you would see all that information. And that's the same, exactly the same thing for any of the modes. So down here, we'll click and go back to our main dashboard, and that's pretty much that. System info shows us status on our machine, hardware load, memory usage, disk usage, network traffic, temperature of the CPU, our radio status, what our frequencies are, simplex mode, etc. So that's very cool. You can go to simple view, and it basically cuts out all that stuff and just shows us activity, key ups remotely and key ups locally. So we'll go back to our regular view. If we jump into admin, at this point, there are some other functions in admin that are interesting that you may want to look at. There's an update button right there, so you can have WPSD go out and check. We'll get to advanced in a second. Power lets you turn off the hotspot or reboot the hotspot gracefully instead of just unplugging the power. Here's our system details, which is an in-depth view of all the stats on our computer, memory usage, file systems, the host operating system, versions, hardware IDs, the versions of different binaries within the WPSD software suite, and our synchronization and time status. As anything with networking, time is critical. So WPSD has an NTP service in it, and it goes out and it actively polls to make sure that it stays in sync with the right time. So that is all critical. Going back to config, and let's go to advanced. And you see the big warnings here. Be careful messing with this stuff. If you don't know what you're doing, you could hose the thing, and then you're going to have to rebuild it from scratch. The other function that you can do before we get to the really cool stuff is backup and restore. And you can download the config. So once you have it working and you've tested it and it's good, grab a download of the config. And that way, if you do monkey with it and something gets screwed up, you can come over here and restore the config you just made. And it downloads it to your default download folder on your computer. So that's very excellent. If we go back to config, and now we're going to go to advanced again. So you have some things here, tools. This will show you the statuses where you can stop and start the various WPSD services. We can force an update of our host files. You can do some other settings that are a little bit more advanced, and I don't want to go into these too much. SSH access gives you command line access to the Raspberry Pi itself. You will log in with PiStar and whatever you set your password to, and you'll be at the command line. That's a whole thing about using Linux, and if you don't know how to do it, that's way beyond the scope of this video. DMR jitter test I have never played with. MMDVM host calibration is interesting. I'm not going to do it, but you can select the mode, and then this will help you figure out your bit error rate. You select the mode, that you want to use, and then you transmit, and then you can move your receive offset here instead of having to go in and edit a number like you had to in Pi-Star. You also have a file manager in here, which lets you scroll through the file system of the SD card and do some rudimentary functions. So if we go back to advanced again and tools, we also can force an upgrade on the board hardware from the web server. Here you have full editors, and I'm not going to get into all these. I just want to show you these briefly. MMDVM host, let's take a look at him. That's this text file, and this is stuff that you can all access through the menu system, most of this. Again, be careful messing with this, because if you change some of these, it's not going to work. You can change it back, but you need to know what you changed. And again, you can do most of the editing in this through the web interface, and it's a lot easier. All right, so the last piece we want to look at here under the advanced configuration is going to be our quick editors. These are similar to the advanced in the old Pi-Star software. And so here you can edit specific settings for each mode. And instead of editing a text file like you can in the full editors, here you click the interface button and you get a web interface to edit settings for that specific function within WPSD. And that covers most everything in here that I wanted to share with you guys today. WPSD is a really nice upgrade for your hotspot functionality. Pi-Star was a great program in its time. I felt that the interface was always a little elderly and kludgy, but I like WPSD, and I have converted all of my hotspots to WPSD. Now, one thing I will mention, originally, Chip put out a replacement dashboard for Pi-Star that he called the W0CHP dashboard, and that was an add-on to the Pi-Star software. This is a complete replacement for Pi-Star. You don't need the Pi-Star image. We didn't download that. We got the full image straight from Chip's website. And Chip has said that he is not supporting updating the dashboard for Pi-Star anymore. He said if you want to keep using this and get updates, you need to switch over, get rid of Pi-Star, and install WPSD directly. And that's fine, and it's a simple process to do and doesn't take long. So that is about all I've got for you guys today. I wanted to share this with you. This is basic setup stuff. In the future, I'll probably do another video specifically with WPSD and setting up DMR talk groups and how that all works. And we'll probably do something with DMR code plugs down the road. But I wanted to get this video out to share WPSD and how it works. Great piece of software. Chip has a Discord that supports WPSD. I'll put a link to that in the description below. And of course, I'll have links to the other software that we looked at in here to get us to this point. So, guys, y'all have a great day. 73.